is there any research about long-term retention from online learning? My experience is that I can get through lessons online and students can show learning and understanding in the short term. However, I find that when I refer to a lesson from a few months earlier, retention is low. Any thoughts? Yes, many thoughts. If you look at in-person learning as well, unfortunately, retention can be an issue. One of the biggest solutions is visual learning. For some reason, the amount that we are able to remember as human beings is very much proportionate to whether we've seen it and whether we've done it. So experiential and visual learning. That's why it's important using gestures and images. I would say the same issue can come up in in-person teaching. How do we improve retention? Use more images, use more gestures, but above all, third thing is associated with positive emotions. That's why gamifying is really important with kids and teens. Positive emotions, images that move, us moving. There's something about it that helps us hold on to concepts. Should we insist to use their camera to follow them more efficiently? This is a really good question because sometimes learners feel that using a webcam isn't always useful. Why do I have to turn it on? This has been a very common experience with teens. I would argue that if we're doing deliberate forms of practice, systematized deliberate forms of practice, that we need to see people. Because we need to see them speaking. We actually need to see if they're doing it. Us as human beings, if we just hear a voice, there's less of a sense of presence. And that's what we really should be doing here is cultivating presence online. If we hear people interacting, that's a form of presence. It's even better if we can physically see them and we can see that they're doing something. So I would say, should we insist? Yes, I would recommend it if possible. Nadine says, in your experience, does this approach also work for kids and teens who prefer a more kinesthetic, tactile learning style? Yes, I would get on to the fact as well that in online lessons, it's also nice to include activities that do feature tactile elements. For example, I showed an example of a young man presenting something. I think that's one of the simplest ways to get kids and teens to do this is a Pictionary, is hold a piece of paper, get a pen, and draw it for us. This can be done on a physical simulacrum of a whiteboard. It can also be done on the online whiteboard. It is tactile in the sense that I'm touching it, I'm doing it. I think it's nice for younger learners to hold something in their hands. So doing it on a physical piece of paper, making things and then using them. A very simple example is a cootie catcher. It's a wonderful opportunity for students to interact. It is 100% tactile. Drawing, presenting, those are also forms of tactile activities that can work just as well online. You do need to give space and time for them and have very clear instructions, but they can be applicable. Audrey says, what about a very quiet group? Like those groups who just do not contribute. In the classroom, at least eye contact is there and you can play a game a bit. But online, especially with teens, they'll hide behind the camera and not feel the need to contribute. Here, I would say, Audrey, what's going to be really important is using a lot of group repetition. Because indeed, speaking a foreign language in a foreign environment online with a new teacher can be daunting. Moreover, teens, as we've seen, there's a lot of social anxiety about speaking up, potentially making mistakes. Group repetition, I found, is a really nice way to overcome this fear of speaking. That is to say, saying something yourself and asking for the group to repeat, as I did in the kids' example. This can also be done for teens and in the guise of working on pronunciation, for example, practicing minimal pairs as a class, but even simple questions and answers, practicing past tense forms, the different pronunciations that come with ed verbs, depending on where consonants fall within the verb. This can be very, very useful. And I find that once we get in the habit of speaking becomes easier. But sometimes also the fact that we're repeating it as a group doesn't mean that learners don't feel singled out. They don't feel that they're the only one speaking if the entire group is repeating. Can this be done effectively and efficiently online? Yes. In my experience, yes. So I would highly recommend using group repetition. Also, the second thing is it is a very common remedy to shy groups are good icebreakers. I would always make sure to start off with a couple of really clear icebreakers in a lesson. Very often teachers go straight into content, which is even more daunting because we're learning something new with a new group and a new language. It can be very overwhelming. So starting off with a clear icebreaker warm-up phase, a good 5 to 10 minutes of rituals. So activities that we would do on a regular basis that learners find easy, develop confidence, boost their confidence. Number 2, icebreakers by which I have to speak quickly, find the result to something and say it out loud, such as a game. There are many good games out there, but one of my favorites is Backs to the Board. That is to say where A word is shown to a group who has to explain it to a learner who has to find the answer. This is a common icebreaker. There are many others. And then as well, to top off the warm-up phase, I would use revision of previously seen material. Once again, this is a confidence booster. He or she who says more confidence generally implies more fluency. So starting off with a really solid warm-up is really important, and then using a lot of group repetition. Those two elements, I believe, Audrey, can really help with shy groups. Anna says, yes, I'm very interested in this classroom, in the classroom management aspect of this. Yes, classroom management. This is a good point. So a point I wanted to get to, because it's one of the most important things that comes up with kids and teens, is how do I effectively manage attention in classroom? Make sure that number one, I can get that attention. Number two, I can hold on to it throughout the duration of the lesson. What's important to note is that our tolerance for learning online is a little bit, in terms of the duration, is a little bit shortened as compared to in person. Why? There's screen fatigue. So I would shoot for really short, snappy activities. I would say a duration of maybe 20 minutes maximum per activity. I would keep it short. And above all, include a lot of micro variations. That is to say, one main activity and slight changes on that activity. For example, to go back to the example with the teens, practicing simple past tense verbs on the subject of what did you do last weekend, a micro variation would be, well, the main variation is we're doing it as a group. The micro variation might be now the teens are asking me the questions, or I'm asking the teens the questions, or we break off into breakout rooms, and then they're asking each other the individual questions, and then we switch the groups. These are all small variations which will help learners stay engaged with the task at hand, because our brains crave novelty. If we can give learners new ideas, new experiences, they'll generally stay more attentive than if it's just the same thing every single time. It gets boring. So important, quick, snappy activities with micro variations. In terms of class management, online learning environment has a very unique capacity, which is to say microphone muting. So in periods where it's really important that learners be focused in on one thing, for example, watching a video clip where it's imperative that they hear the sound, we can mute everyone's microphone and ask them to listen into the dialogue, to note down specific concepts, to note down new ideas, words they don't know, and then unmute. This is a really helpful function as well. If we want 2 or 3 or a small group of learners specifically to interact, we can mute the rest of the class and focus in on that individual group. It's not a function I would focus in on. It's not the only feature I would use in class, but it is very useful. And it is unique to an online learning environment. Staying busy with a group of kids, rather keeping them busy through group repetition is really important. As I said, repeating a main sentence out, having them repeat. Also systematizing deliberate practice will all help learners be more concentrated. Why? Because they are continually interacting with either between themselves or the teacher. So all of these steps hopefully can help classroom management in an online learning environment.